Today I want to tell you about one of the craziest stories in the history of modern gaming, and I'm not exaggerating. Did you know that in 2020 there was a case where allegedly a publisher stole an entire video game from a developer and started selling it without paying profits or proceeds to the developer, and then started claiming publicly that they actually had developed it, had done everything, and owned the rights to that intellectual property? Well, that actually happened, and it's what we're talking about today. I will say there's a ton of alleged things in this case. A lot of it is just filled with question marks. We're going to try to navigate it as clearly as we can, but just understand as we go through this opening section of the video when we're describing the accusations, things may not all be what they appear to be. And I don't want to spoil it, so I'll leave it there. Make sure to like the video if you enjoy it. Make sure to subscribe as well to get notified of new content the moment that it comes out every Monday and Friday. And if you got a free minute after this video, jump over to Twitch and say hi. We're probably live at this very moment that you're watching this video, so come say hi. And I know what you're thinking. He's probably not live actually at this very moment that I'm watching this video. You never know. You might be surprised. Links in the link tree in the description box below the like button. But with that said, let's get into it and talk about this really bizarre and wacky case. Join me over at the desk. Let's go. Okay, so the first thing we need to understand about this case is that we are dealing with a game called The Sinking City. It's a Lovecraftian horror detective game that's got amazing art direction, some of the best cinematics that I've ever seen in a game. Like, this is probably one of the best cinematic trailers I've seen in the last 10 years. It's just phenomenally well put together. I got that on video. Oh my God. The wife brought me a Sprite and now I'm like, oh, I'm drenched. Look at my pant leg. Oh God, it's so sticky. Do you think she shook it up on purpose just to like mess with me? Because she knew I was filming and recorded that. If she meant for that to happen, bravo, brava. That was brilliant. Okay, well, back to it, I guess. So yeah, all of that aside, Sprite spraying everywhere set aside, it's a really interesting concept. It's an interesting setting. You play as like a former Navy officer who's trying to solve the mysteries of this city that's been flooded by this strangely mysterious force filled with Lovecraftian horror monsters. It's really interesting, and it's a world that I definitely want to explore and want to get to know better, especially as you like discover visions of yourself and different versions of you keep dying and cycling. It's a really interesting concept. But the actual game doesn't actually look quite like that cinematic trailer. It looks more like this. It's also available on the Nintendo Switch and a bunch of other platforms, not just PC, but the final version is sort of a clunky AA open world detective game, and that's about it. The combat is pretty terrible. There is zero hand holding, so you're going to be stumbling around trying to figure out what you're supposed to do next a lot because there's little to no guidance at all. But the story is what keeps it going. I mean, there's tons of different cutscenes and things that are captivating and interesting in their own right, and that will drive players to continue exploring because the world is just interesting enough to do that. And this is something that really makes games like these shine. Like, you don't get really unique stories, worlds, and settings like this anymore in AAA games. You only see this type of thing in AA or indie titles because it's, I guess, too much of a risk for huge studios to put out games that take these risks. But I don't know. I love it. This game had a ton of potential, but we're not here to actually talk about that. We're here to talk about how the developers and the publishers got into a big spat arguing back and forth over who owned what. So you see, the game launched in 2019 in June, and it was initially received with sort of mixed reviews. It wasn't tremendously well received, had technical issues, screen tearing, and it felt pretty undercooked and underbaked. It just felt as though it was a great idea that wasn't given enough time and money to really shine. But it was successful enough that it probably would have made back its development costs, which were pretty low, and the developers would just move on to a sequel or some other project. However, pretty soon after the game's release, there started to be talks of disputes between Frogwares and the publishers, nothing really clear, at least until August of 2020, when this blog post was put out. You see, they were announcing that they were delisting the Sinking City from all major storefronts: Steam, Epic, PlayStation, Xbox, all of it. You see, what they say is in 2017, we, being Frogwares, signed the Sinking City contract as a licensing agreement with Big Ben/Nacon, 2 years after the start of production. So they started in 2015 making the game, and in 2017 they signed a publishing contract, which would basically pay them up front for development costs, and then they would be able to develop the game to completion, start selling it using Nacon's help, which went by Big Ben Interactive at the time that they signed the contracts. And then once the game started making money, both the publisher and the developer would get a split of it going forward. The one big thing they wanted to note, though, is that in these agreements, they always state that Frogwares is the sole owner of the intellectual property. They don't share those rights. They own and create those games. They don't share rights to it. But you see, as development went on, they noticed that BBI/Nacon was hundreds and hundreds of days behind in payments in total, each sum due on average being 40 days late, while milestones were always on time and approved by the licensee. We had to issue formal notices multiple times so that we were able to receive the money that was owed to us. So they say here that they did receive the money owed to them, it was just very late. They go on to say that the lack of commitment to honor the financial obligations soon turned into ongoing pressure, which I don't blame them. As somebody who pays independent contractors and employees myself, it's a lot of pressure if the money you expect to come in on, say, the 20th of the month doesn't come in until the 30th of the following month. That's a huge deal. That could lead to me having to put payroll on a credit card, having to go into debt to make my business run properly. That doesn't work. That's not okay. And so for a huge company like Nacon/Big Ben Interactive to have those issues and speed bumps and to be so late on so many payments, it's certainly not cool, and is certainly in breach of pretty much every contract that I can imagine being put together. I can't imagine a situation where a contract is written out that says, and this party is free to be a month and a half late on payments. It's not a thing. There might be a little grace period, but usually that's highly exceptional. And for corporate deals or deals between corporations, it just doesn't happen. But they say furthermore, once BBI/Nacon bought out a competing studio that was working on another Lovecraftian game, they, being Nacon, dictated that we, Frogwares, give them our source code for the Sinking City. Once again, they don't own the IP, they're a licensee. They sell the game, not develop and co-create it. So after they refused to comply, Frogwares refused to comply, apparently they stopped receiving financial contributions for over 4 months. So according to this representative from Frogwares, they refused to share their hard work with this random other studio that was making a game similar, because basically they wanted to just copy and paste assets and code and things that had been developed for the Sinking City into that other game to make the development move faster and to basically just cheat the whole system. And so they refused to do that. And in reaction, the publishers just stopped paying them. They just didn't send money, which is alleged. They're claiming that hasn't been confirmed. But if that's true, that's just so not okay in so many ways. I can't even begin to describe how messed up that is. Imagine if you were told by your boss, hey, I need you to do this thing that's totally not allowed and not cool at all. I need you to, I don't know, lie to corporate, say that I was here working an extra week when I wasn't here and I was on vacation. I just need the extra money, so just tell them I was here. And it's that's really not okay. I'm not going to do that. Well, too bad. I'm not going to pay you for 4 months. What? That's not okay. That's not cool in any way. That's alleged, but if it's true, that's messed up. They go on to say that this kind of unacceptable behavior took on other forms as well. With regard to the business plan, we were kept in the dark. We asked on multiple occasions to see sales forecasts, but the figures sent to us were not consistent. We weren't sure of how potential sales could turn out, meaning that we were not able to properly plan our future. Were there any sales deals arranged? We were not sure. Only the exclusivity agreement with Epic Games Store gave us some respite because we knew what we would receive due to the minimum guarantees in Epic's contract. And then on June 27th of 2019, The Sinking City was released on Xbox One, PS4, and the Epic Games Store. That was a great day for us, and once the game was released, we received a letter from Big Ben/Nacon that the milestones that were previously approved were being canceled, meaning that Frogwares would not receive any profit from the sales of the game. A retroactive cancellation on not delivering a product on time that is already out in the market. It's not acceptable. That was when our legal battle began. And then the rest of the article goes on to describe all of the really weird, bizarre stuff that started to happen once this lawsuit was filed, because it started to look like Nacon just abandoned all consideration for being coy about their efforts to sort of subvert the ownership considerations of the Sinking City, and they just wanted to take the rights for themselves. For example, the Frogwares logo was removed from some of the PS4 and Xbox One game covers and other marketing materials, and the developers were only mentioned on the reverse side with the technical partners, again creating a perception that Frogwares were neither the authors nor the owners of the game. Furthermore, we were surprised to find out the copyright notices on box covers and storefront pages were legally incorrect, creating a perception that Frogwares was not the owner of the IP. A tabletop version of the Sinking City RPG was created without informing the developers, the owners of the IP, and was distributed freely, selling it freely without notifying Frogwares at all. And when launching Nacon on the public market, the official stock market prospectus suggested that the intellectual property of the Sinking City was owned by BBI/Nacon, while again, the Sinking City was actually owned by Frogwares. As you see here, they list the Sinking City along with all of the other franchises that they hold in their portfolio, heavily implying that they own the rights to it. And again, you don't see Frogwares listed here. They just completely ignore it and pretend as though they own it. It's weird. They finish this out with a statement saying, "To developers and people of the industry, if you want to talk about this, reach out. We will try to answer you as much as we can so that you won't end up in similar situations. It's a shame that in such a creative industry, there is so much energy wasted because of such practices. That's why we decided to write this open letter. We hope that this transparency will help everyone to be aware of what is really going on behind the scenes. We only have one goal, helping to banish bad practices by speaking freely about them, instead of remaining subject to the code of silence. We know that we are not the only ones in this situation. This is our way to help the video game industry become more ethical." Okay, we got through all of that. Time for a Sprite break. I'm opening it much more slowly this time. Okay, we're good. Something about a cold Sprite, it just hits different. Love it. So all of this started working its way through the court system slowly but surely over in France. And all of this was complicated by COVID, of course, because basically everything was complicated by COVID. And you see, one of the special exceptions that a lot of national governments made during the coronavirus lockdowns were that certain contracts couldn't just be canceled and voided randomly in the middle of lockdowns. And the reason that they put these restrictions in place to sort of keep contracts together was because they didn't want thousands of leases being broken. They didn't want thousands of contracts for manufacturing goods to go completely unfilled and unpaid. They wanted to keep the economy somewhat held together. So they said, okay, you can't cancel everything. You gotta keep things sort of ready to go on the burner, so once we reopen the economy, we can get rolling again. I mean, again, at that time, back in early 2020, most people thought that COVID would be over and done with by like the summer. I remember talking to a friend of mine who's a doctor, and she was like, yeah, no, my guess would be that probably July, August, this will all be behind us. It's hilarious to think of now, but that's what we thought at the time. But some of these actions by Frogwares started to look as though they might be violating some of these restrictions and guidelines. Specifically, removing the game from all of these storefronts looked as though it effectively was tantamount to terminating those contracts in the middle of the pandemic, which offered all sorts of big legal question marks. Nobody was really sure if this was actually allowed or if it was something that was going to be forbidden in the courts. So it was a bit of a gamble for them to do this. But the reason they took the game off of all of these storefronts was because they didn't want Nacon and Big Ben Interactive to continue profiting off of their title. They claimed that the publishers were just selling their game, not paying royalties, not paying profits out, and they had basically stolen the game. And so they just wanted to deal with it and end that profit from them. So they just said, screw it, we'll take it off of everything. Nobody gets the game. If you aren't going to play nice, nobody gets it. And this would end up being a bit of a blunder on their part, because when this eventually got into the court system, the French courts were not that big of fans of this move. You see, in the first decision that was put out by the Paris Court of Appeal back in October of 2020, just a few months after that initial filing was done, they ruled that by removing the game, Frogwares had, quote, terminated its contract in a manifestly unlawful manner. They went on to say that the contract must be continued until a decision has been made on whether Nacon breached its agreement, as Frogwares alleges. The developer has been ordered to refrain from any further action that would affect this contract. So, okay, late October 2020, they're told very clearly by the Court of Appeal not to mess with the contract anymore, to leave the games up until the courts have decided what actually is going on. Pretty clear. Don't mess with anything. What did they do? They filed a DMCA against their own game. Yeah, so in March of 2021, they looked on Steam and found that the publisher, Nacon, had actually uploaded a version of The Sinking City that was hacked, effectively a pirated version of the game, and they started selling it on Steam, taking all of the proceeds without the permission or consent of Frogwares. And so, in order to deal with this, instead of just letting it work through the courts again, like the courts wanted, they went and filed a DMCA takedown against their own game. Now, Frogwares and Nacon both responded to a Vice representative on this particular story with, in this case, Frogwares saying, quote, regarding our use of DMCA to remove the game from Steam, we believe in a very short time we were able to collect extremely strong evidence to indicate this version of the game was pirated and contains content that Nacon has absolutely no rights to, namely the Merciful Madness DLC. A DMCA notice proved to be our most effective tool to give us time to gain further potential evidence and to start the required and lengthy additional legal processes to prevent this from happening again. We are aware that a final ruling on whether Frogwares are obligated to deliver a Steam version has not yet been made and could take years. As it stands, we have an appeals court ruling saying, until further notice, Frogwares do not need to deliver a Steam version to Nacon. In the meantime, Nacon decided to take justice into their own hands and release a pirated build. We are also aware that the DMCA claim on this Steam version may only be a temporary fix and that the game may make a comeback in this form or another, providing partners like Valve with finalized rulings and third-party verified evidence so they can make their final decision takes time and resources. If in the meantime they decide that they have to continue selling the game, we can only respect that while continuing to speak to them and provide them with more information. Put simply, they found evidence that was pretty clear to them that this version of the game was pirated and that Nacon was selling it on Steam in breach of the ruling from the appeals court just because they could and they wanted the revenue from it. And so they filed the DMCA claim to get it taken down. Again, sort of taking the law into their own hands, but what are you gonna do? Now, Nacon said in response that they had, quote, repeatedly and unsuccessfully requested that Frogwares make the game available on Steam, failing which it would apply a clause in the contract where in such a case, the game would be adapted by a third party, end quote. Nacon essentially confirmed what Frogwares was accusing, but claims it was within contractual rights. In other words, they admitted that it was not a legitimate copy of the game, that it was basically a pirated version that they had adapted, but that it was okay because a clause in the contract made it okay. It's so bizarre. Like, what is happening? Now, if you're like me, you're probably looking at this with sort of skeptical hippo eyes. You're probably like, okay, what is going on? Like, how bad is this contract? How vague is it? Is everybody wondering what's going on? Like, no contract can possibly be this vague. Or one of the parties is just totally full of it, or some combination thereof, but something weird is going on. And the thing to understand is that this is not the first time that Frogwares has been involved in contractual disputes with publishers, okay? They've done this actually a lot. So it could be that they just don't tolerate publishers pushing them around, or it's that they have a history of sort of misunderstanding contracts or of writing convoluted contracts that can be abused by publishers. It's really confusing, but like in this case, you see that in 2002, the distribution of the game Sherlock Holmes: The Mystery of the Mummy was made by intermediaries who did not pay the studio honestly, and as a result, Frogwares filed a bunch of lawsuits against them. Furthermore, they were licensed with Focus Home Interactive as a licensee from 2004 to 2005 and from 2014 to 2015 and beyond. And in 2019, Frogwares claimed that Focus Home Interactive was not the publisher of the Sherlock Holmes games, but a distribution intermediary that did not participate in the financing of the games. The relationship between the two companies ended in a dispute in the fall of 2019 when Focus Home Interactive's license ended, and the situation resulted in the temporary withdrawal of most Frogwares games from multiple large platforms like Steam and Epic, and I don't think Epic actually, just Steam and Xbox, PlayStation, those places. And the development studio, who have the sole rights to the games, had to initiate all sorts of new certifications that eventually got the games back up in 2020. So they have a history of running into problems with publishers. But the big question in my mind is whether or not this is just a Frogwares issue, that they've done this repeatedly, or if most other development studios have run into this type of thing and just don't publicly talk about it anywhere near as much, because I'm sure this type of thing happens a lot elsewhere in the industry. I just personally haven't seen another development studio that makes it so public that they're posting like big blog pieces about it, and they talk about it super publicly. Normally, companies don't air their dirty laundry like that, but Frogwares does. I mean, there was another case, in this case, this company, Atomic, I think is how it's pronounced. Atomic maybe is what it's, I really don't know. I've never heard of it. But what they said is that on their platform, they were selling The Sinking City, and instead of just filing the claims, because guess what? Atomic or Utomic, whatever it is, they don't actually legally have the right to sell the game. So they took a pirated version of the game off of Pirate Bay or something, and they started selling that for $30, $40, and just pocketing the cash. And instead of filing the paperwork, the developers, Frogwares, actually hopped on Twitter and responded directly to them. Hello, Utomic. Who gave you the rights to sell our game, The Sinking City? Not us. And it can only be us, since it is our game, our marks, our marketing assets, our work. Please contact us ASAP. And then they went on, hi, Frogwares, definitely need to discuss this. I agree. Can you follow back so we can discuss this in a DM? Thanks. Like totally oh, I'm blown away. I can't believe, yeah, total misunderstanding, right? We just accidentally started selling a pirated version of your game. Oopsie. You can't make this stuff up. So, okay, that's the scene set. Let's talk about it. Let's huddle up. Come on. So all of this is still working its way through the court system. Don't think that this is settled. This is all very much still alleged. Nothing's been decided by the courts either which way, definitively. So we don't really know who to believe or who is completely right. What it seems is going on, though, regardless, Frogwares gets into this trouble relatively frequently compared to what other studios of their same size have run into. And so it seems as though they could perhaps benefit from heavy investments in better contract lawyers who look over these things before they're signed. That would be my suggestion. I mean, all joking aside, it's just like whenever you're dealing with this type of thing, not just in the video game space, but like in the business world and even in your personal life, if you have something going on in the legal system, don't talk about it. Like, don't air your dirty laundry because you get nothing for it. Like, if they had just gone and filed the paperwork for this lawsuit and moved about their business, they would have been totally fine. They wouldn't have gotten an appeals court decision against them. They would have been sitting pretty well going into this next phase of the rulings process. But now they look as though they are, in effect, a troublemaker to the court, and that just never works out. You want the court to have every reason to side with you and to think that you are playing by the book. You don't want the court to be like, oh, these guys, like, they've broken multiple rulings, they filed DMCA takedowns, breached their own contract because they think that the other guy breached it. Like, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. Just like, don't talk about it. Shut up and just do your thing. It's not worth it. But I do think all of this brings up a very important point, which is that small development studios don't have the resources usually to fight huge publishers like this. Normally, if they get taken for a ride by Nacon, Focus Home, whoever they might be sort of taken advantage of by, they normally wouldn't have the resources to deal with it. They would just have to kind of suck it up because they're reliant on the publisher that they are in a dispute with to pay their salaries and to pay for their mortgages and to pay to put food on their families' plates. Like, it's really difficult to fight that, right? So I can absolutely understand why this type of abuse by big publishers could happen pretty frequently with smaller development studios. And it's just unfortunate that it seems to be pretty common. One of the best things that's happened in recent memory is with Steam and even with Game Pass, small studios are able to self-publish games more easily than ever before. And that is a very good thing because it means that those small dev teams can just totally bypass all of this garbage. And that's good to see. And say what you will about Epic Games, Epic Games is actually one of the best partners for some of these AA and single A studios. AAA studios have enough cash on hand that they can fund the development of their own stuff usually by themselves. They don't need to go to outside partners for help. But for these smaller studios, they usually need a bit of extra cash. So they go to publishers and they go to these other companies that might take them for a ride or try to take advantage of the situation to help with development on another project that they're working on or whatever else it might be. Epic Games, they do guarantee usually flat sums of money based on whatever the game is. So they can effectively guarantee a return for the developers, and that is a huge deal. From what I've been told, it's similar to a lot of Game Pass contracts, which guarantee certain returns for games if you can deliver it onto the platform exclusively on time. But all of that said, I wish Frogwares the best of luck in their legal proceedings. All of the stuff they've said, I think, is probably pretty accurate. I have no reason to believe that they're making up some of the things that they're mentioning, like the pirated copy of the game that the publisher basically agrees is pirated, but they say it's okay. Like stuff like that. That's just weird and bizarre. I think I'm leaning into Frogwares a little bit more, but I'm always open to having my mind changed by evidence. So who knows? Maybe Nacon will surprise me. As of right now, I'm not particularly sold. But you know what? It's just another case of the gaming industry being bizarre and interesting all at the same time. But that's it for me. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. It actually really does help me figure out what videos you guys enjoy and what you want to see more of. If you have a story you'd like me to cover in an upcoming video, make sure to drop that in the comment section. I love hearing things that I haven't heard about before. And once again, subscribe, because that's what YouTubers are supposed to ask you to do. Come say hi over on Twitch. I'll leave it there. I love you all very, very much. I'll see you in the next video. Hugs and kisses. Bye-bye.